Good afternoon and welcome to the 2020 Clayman Artist Salon. I'm Professor Valerie Miner, artist in residence at the Clayman Institute for Gender Research. Our salon, which started 13 years ago, highlights one Stanford artist a year. The artists come from various disciplines. Last year we hosted dancer and choreographer Anna Tabar-Smith. In 2018, we featured writer Chang Ray Lee. A few important notes before we begin. The bathrooms are on the other side of the reception area. Perhaps just as important, we're offering yummy refreshments. Please stay a few minutes afterwards to chat with our guest and with each other while you enjoy the food and drink. I would like to thank my colleagues at the Institute for their support, and special thanks to the extraordinary Natalie Mason, who's never paying attention when I thank her, who is our events coordinator. She's just wonderful and does everything, and we couldn't live without her. Our salon lasts from 4:15 to 5:30. We adjourn promptly so people can catch trains, buses, planes, and flying carpets. After I introduce our distinguished guest, she will present her work. Then we'll open the floor to questions and discussion. We have about half an hour, 40 minutes for discussion, so please write down those questions that you're going to forget when we say it's time for questions. Patricia Alessandrini is an assistant professor in the Department of Music, as well as the Stanford Center for Computer Research in Music and Acoustics. She is a composer, sound artist, and researcher on embodied interaction and immersive experience. Her works have been presented in numerous festivals in the Americas, Asia, Australia, and over 15 European countries. She's also toured extensively as a performer of live electronics. Alessandrini studied composition with electronics, the Conservatorio di Bologna, and composition at the Conservatoire de Strasbourg. She holds a PhD from Princeton University and a second PhD from the Sonic Arts Research Center at Queen's University in Belfast. Previous teaching positions included appointments at the University of Bangor and at Goldsmiths University of London. Here at Stanford, she teaches in the areas of composition, sonic arts, and computer music. I'm sure after today her classes will be even more crowded. Meanwhile, please join me in giving a very warm welcome to Patricia Alessandrini.
Thank you so much, Valerie, and I just want to say thank you so much to the Clayman Institute. Thank you everyone for coming. I saw the salon last year when it was Ada Lovelace, and I was so inspired by that. That was my first year here, and it made such an impact on me. So I'm really particularly honored to be representing in this format myself. So what I'll be talking about is this work that I did at the Barbican, which was a tribute to Ada Lovelace, and in general, how I'm thinking of this idea of the expressivity of machines, and particularly in relation to AI. So I just want to give a little overview of the kind of work that I've been doing. So if I zoom in, right, literally on some of these projects, most of my work is interactive in some way. So this is a work, for instance, that is networked. You see that there's performers here in different sites. And what's happening is there's a game, this was a video game created by Rob King that people are playing in real time, and that is producing both electronics and a score for the performers in real time. So it's kind of typical in a way of bringing these different medium together in interactive situations. I've also been involved in some design projects. So a big part of my research here actually is design for inclusive practice for people who are professional or non-professional, different physical abilities, different intellectual abilities. And other design projects, maybe you noticed this design project, maybe a little bit more functional in some ways, but the idea there was really trying to think of sex toys in a non-binary kind of a way. And I'll talk later just a little bit about this project, which had interactive instruments that were embedded in a household environment. But mainly for this project, what was most relevant is the piano machine, which we'll talk a little bit about in more detail, but it's an artificial way of causing the piano to sound through physical computing. And this is kind of an offshoot, is the harp excitation device using similar technology. So I wanted to show a little bit as an example of my work, this installation. So in this installation, you can see that there are no performers. So the idea of expressivity it really is this idea of making machines sing. This was first presented in Paris in 2010. And basically, there are suspended instruments and plates which are themselves making sound. And these two instruments were designed by Paul Stapleton. And what they're playing is this adagio introduction of the Dissonance Quartet by Mozart. And this music is particularly known for its kind of suspended feel. So I took this suspended feel to an extreme. I took several different recordings of this piece and transposed them down without time correction. So that's basically like if we took an old reel-to-reel tape and played it at a really slow speed. So it's lower and it's slower. So usually this introduction should only take about 1.5 minutes to play, roughly on average, and the installation is 23 minutes. And from there it plays in groups. Yeah, so it's a lot of stretching. You'll see here that in terms of expressivity, what's happening with the plates, because we think of objects as being static, right, and not moving, and what's happening is that there are a pulley system which is bending the motors in this way. Yeah, so they start in a position like this, and then they bend up, and that changes the way that they render the frequencies that are artificially being played through them. There's also a little bit of synthesis. There are some speakers that are hidden above in the installation, and those are playing physical modeling synthesis, which is a way of creating a virtual instrument. So these virtual instruments, do you remember in the pictures of the instruments I showed you, there was one that was cymbal-like? So that cymbal-like one has a curvature that looks something like this. Okay, that's the basic shape of it. So then I modeled a different shape, which was more curved, and there's an interpolation between those two shapes as if that was being bent, because I couldn't actually physically bend it. So I'll play just a little bit of this installation to give you an idea of what that sounds like. I'll start with the beginning so that you can see the setup. This whole video you can see on Vimeo, and I'll show you here. So in the beginning, if we go back a little bit, sorry to fast forward, you see that the plate is in a relaxed position. Yeah, you can see by the shadow and the shape of it. Whereas when we go on further, say here, you see that it's much more bent. So what's happening is there's a very, very, very slow movement going on that's bending it upwards over about 10 minutes. It's almost imperceptible, but you see over time that it's changing. And so once we get to that point, they're in a much more tense kind of position, and therefore they're very susceptible to higher frequencies. Almost as if we took a string and we tightened the string. So here you're going to hear much higher frequencies than in the beginning. And you'll also hear this maybe slow movement of the harmony from Mozart. So now, from that higher position, they're going to unfold in a sense, and you can see if I fast forward, you can see that movement. But you can see it because it's fast forwarded. And so in the Mozart, at the end, there's this big G major cadence, bringing in the next section. So there's this long, and you can imagine it's stretched out as a very long chord. So I limited it down to the smallest sonic element that I could, a sinusoid. And then I send that sinusoid through the plates, and what's happening is that the movement of the plates modifies that sound. So it's not the sound itself that's changing, it's the expression by the plate, by its physical capacities, its physical properties, as it's being bent, that causes an evolution of the sound. So I'll play a little bit of that. You hear that vibration? Fast forward a little bit to where it eventually winds up. You'll hear this is quite different, even though it's the same material in essence. We hear the cycle a little more. Now we hear some overtones. Render their physical selves with just this little bit of added artificial manipulation of the bending. So I want to talk a little bit about my design work, which has a lot to do with the Ada Lovelace project, which I'm going to present momentarily. This is a project, so in this picture, the idea was to repurpose some ordinary objects. So looking at this picture, can anyone tell me what they think might be an instrument in this picture? The iron, sorry? The iron, great. No one ever guesses that at first. That's right. And apparently, making electronic instruments from irons is kind of a thing. There's other people who are doing this, especially women creators are doing this. Anyone else see something that might be an instrument?
The glasses.
The glasses, that's right. That glasses absolutely can be. Also, the radio is functioning. That's kind of the more obvious one, right? So the idea of this piece was, I was thinking about how, especially when there was a very traditional kind of image, especially in certain Anglo cultures, of the women at home, working with doing the housework, the work that has to be done at home. But there was a push towards innovation in these devices, and at the same time, innovations in hi-fi. And a lot of the home hi-fi was being aimed towards women, in fact, and they were pictured in publicity. I have a former colleague, Tom Percher, who was doing research on this and looking at how a lot of this idea of home hi-fi was really aimed towards women. Women were featured in the publicity for it. So this was my idea of women as pioneers in ways that maybe we hadn't thought about. So here is what the radio looks like inside. It's a vintage radio that's kind of emptied out, and there's a microprocessor inside. And what that does is that allows Ping Chen, who is the star, the soprano star of the piece, when she's doing her, she's sort of polishing something, then that's making a musical kind of sound. Using the radio for that was, I had especially felt this, and this is something that I'm working on a lot in my inclusive design, that a lot of people who are using interfaces want to have the experience of the radiation of sound coming close to them. Because with a real physical instrument, right, with a violin or any other instrument, we're hearing the sound in this embodied way close to our own bodies. Whereas often when we're using interfaces, it's coming on speakers that, then there's the problem of where do you place the speaker, is there a monitor, and so on. So this idea of also perhaps embedding the sound onto the instrument. So this is the iron. You see it looks like an ordinary iron. But here, where there's usually the steam coming out is where there's a microphone. There is an accelerometer, which means when you move it, then you pick up the data from the movement. And there are also transducers that make it sound. So I just have a very short demo of what that sounds like. This is me playing with it. I'm not using it as an iron should be, but in the piece, you see I don't do much ironing. But you see in the piece it's actually used as an iron. And when it's in the relaxed position, before you actually use it, then the soprano is able to sing into it to provide it material to then be processed. So now to go to the subject at hand of Ada Lovelace and the tribute to her. So she's often referred to as the first programmer. I'm using firstism in a very careful way here, but I think it's important to vindicate how important she was for computer science theory. She wrote the first algorithm for Charles Babbage's analytical machine. So it's important to say the analytical machine was a theoretical machine. It was a plan for a machine that was never actually built in the end. However, so these were the plans for it to carry out, and basically it was a calculating machine. It was to perform complex calculations beyond what one could do by hand. She was a strong artificial intelligence skeptic. I want to say I'm using that in an anachronistic manner, right? Of the theory at the time that she was developing. So she said, computers can't create anything. For creation requires minimally originating something. But computers originate nothing. They merely do that which we order them via programs to do. So you can imagine in artificial intelligence theory, these kind of statements are really fascinating to reflect upon and absolutely timely right now. So she was cited extensively by Turing in his seminal article on the Turing test, this idea of can computers have consciousness, can computers fool humans into thinking that they are other humans. So we can also speak about, because often we say the Turing test is kind of past right now because it's maybe too low a bar for really looking at consciousness of computers. So we can talk about a Lovelace test. And the Lovelace test is, some theorists put as only if computers originate things should they believe to have minds. So how does this relate to music? Ada Lovelace is credited with the first published imaginings of AI-assisted composition. She said musical fundamental relations of music could be expressed by those of the abstract science of operations, such that a machine could compose elaborate and scientific pieces of music of any degree of complexity or extent. In a moment, we'll look at a timeline and to see how instrumental that was in, and how much longer it took to actually carry these theories out. So some questions. What distinct musical qualities may be achieved by machines beyond verisimilitude to human performance? What may these processes be able to tell us about the nature of human expressivity? And how might machine learning processes be made visible or audible in a live music performance? And it was especially that last that I wanted to try to answer in some way in the work that I was doing. So here's the time when I don't need to spend too much time on this, but especially I wanted you to see this stretch of time between when we're having these theories by Ada Lovelace and when we arrive at the first really important, significant experiments in AI in music. And I always like to show this photo right here, which is at the University of Illinois, where this Iliac Suite, which was a score produced by a computer for a string quartet, where that work was done. Because here in this photo we see these two men in the foreground, and then this woman in the background who is basically operating the computer. And that was actually common at the time, because women had been doing secretarial work, typing, and so on. So the move to data entry and computers was quite a natural one. So here I have this diagram of some of the ways in which artificial intelligence can work in music. But generally what we're looking at is the world of analog, right? You have a gesture, you have a sound, you have someone playing an instrument. Then you're going into the world of digital processing, and that's where you may have your models that are processing this material. You have some kind of mediation that then goes again to the analog world. It has to be in the analog physical world for us to hear it. Now, of course, we could look at a score, right? But if we want to hear it as music, at some point it is becoming sound. But the complex thing, and where I had a lot of interest in this process, is right there in the sense of mediation. Because obviously performers are in the physical world, right? Robotics are kind of in between, right? And so this idea of physical computing, physically making this connection between the symbolic and between the sound really interested me. So that's where the piano machine comes in. So the piano machine I created with a former colleague at Goldsmiths, University of London, where I was before I came here. And I'll show you a little bit how this works. By the way, just to say, because they look different, this is the old version from 2017. This here picture, you see it's a bit more smaller. This is the version from this past year that was made for the Ada Lovelace project. So what's happening here is there's some kind of MIDI messaging. So this could be controlled just by a keyboard. That's the simplest way of doing it, but it could be computer generated. Then that's going to a microprocessor or several microprocessors. And that is going to the actual physical excitation device. And what's happening is that these MIDI messages are deciding how voltage is sent to these little motors. So you see each of these is a little motor with a kind of acrylic casing around it. And these are just the pager motors that are found in your cell phone. So actually making this was, in a way, these are quite inexpensive components. It's more physical time of putting these together that's really the cost in a way. So here's some demonstration. High register, middle register. And what I wanted to show here is that when you're using a keyboard, you can also change the amplitude so that you can get some expressivity. So you can see I'm putting quite a lot of effort into getting those differences in amplitude. So the first application, first performance using this was by the Explore Ensemble in a piece called Tracer la lune dans le droit. And I'm just going to play you a few seconds really of this piece so you get an idea of how this piano machine sounds alongside instruments. A sense of this kind of blending with the instrument. So it sounds, I don't know if it sounds a little bit artificial, but it's certainly instrumental. And then, as I said, there's this offshoot project, and I wanted to mention this as well because it's being used at Stanford by our own FFF ensemble, which is an ensemble made up of all female identifying members that does improvisation and especially uses a lot of different kinds of technology, audiovisual, all sorts of interactive kind of situations. So going back to this question, the question is, what is the role of AI in this piece and in controlling this piano machine and in informing this work for Ada Lovelace? So the basis is similarity matching. And I wanted to just talk with you a little bit about how the similarity matching is working. And to take as an analogy, and really very similar technique, maybe some people have seen this selfie app, that you can basically take a picture of yourself or someone else, okay, so like a target image, and we can match that image to something in a bank. Okay, so the bank in this case is Google Arts and Culture collection of many paintings and so on. So here is what it came up as best match. In this case, you see it's a 54% match, which is pretty good actually, right? So I can take that same principle and I could do that in music. Except what I'm going to do is I'm going to take these little temporal chunks, right? So maybe an attack, a note, and I'm going to match that to something else. But it could be anything. It could be, for instance, the voice that's being matched by an instrument. So if I could just maybe turn down the volume a tiny bit on the main system, because I'm going to play. That's okay. Can you stand up? Is it okay? Thanks for that. Just a notch for this, just slightly loud. And so I'll just explain what this is. This is a clip from an existing film. It's called The Piano Tuner of Earthquakes by the Quay brothers. And what I did was I used an improvisation by a guitarist I've been working with. His name is Mauricio Carrasco. Some of you know him, he's quite well known. So what's happening is the target, what I'm trying to copy, is the voice in the film. And the bank of sound is this improvisation by the guitarist. So instead of hearing, in the beginning there's like a voice-over, you know, in films when the person's thinking and you hear it. That's completely replaced by the guitar. And then you'll hear the voice and the guitar together, so you can actually hear how it's matching one to one.
As I said, my voice is hopeless. I can't sing. Do you need?
So that's completely algorithmically produced, okay? So I use a similar method in this piece, and just to say a little bit about the background of the piece. The first performance was in November of last year. It was written for the Britten Sinfonia with Marta Fontanet-Simmons. And Marta is also involved in this process of generation, because part of the material she sings is generated in real time. And she has a feed, an audio feed, that's giving her that material. So she's kind of part of the machine in a way. And so it was presented in this event called Ada Lovelace, Reinventing the Analytical Machine. And there were also a panel discussion. There was Ursula Martin spoke. If you know, she's a computer scientist and theoretician. And she has also done a lot of work on the Ada Lovelace archives. So I'll just show you a little bit how this is working. So the model in the first place was a piece by Parcel. And I'll just play for you. This is a transcription of it just for lute. So this is the beginning of that. Oops, that's a little bit quiet out there. But this is a transcription. Normally there should be voice. I can just play you a little excerpt, for instance. This is one of the ones with voice. So here. So what I did was I took this transcription as the target. And I took all the other recordings I could find. It's a bit of a rare piece, so there weren't that many recordings. I took all the other recordings and made this big bank out of it, okay? So the game is that for every single note of the lute transcription to find the right match in the other recordings. So in a perfect world, basically it would line up note by note, right? But obviously that's not going to happen because the transcription is a huge reduction. Right? And how do you know if it's the same note in the beginning of the piece? How do you know it's not the same note that comes much later? Right? So what we get is this kind of mishmash of these different recordings. Plus it's happening all at the same time. And as often happens with music of that time, there's a slight difference in the intonation. So now we're getting some kind of clusters between the different results. So here's what the results sound like. I'm going to play that again now with the original played at the same time. Just try it. So if you can hold that in your ears for a moment. Now I'm going to play the actual piece in this performance, and which is a transcription of that. And the transcription is happening with a computer-assisted orchestration. So basically now this is again a kind of similarity matching, saying here's the target, here's the sound that I want to create, here are the instruments, here are the possible kind of sounds and notes they can make. Now choose the best match. But the best match in this case is a combination of the cello has to play this note, the violin has to play this note, and so on. And there's something similar going on with the text. The text is kind of a mishmash of all these different versions because now it's out of order. Right? And I also took, when there was a similarity with the writings of Ada Lovelace, I took some words from her letters. Oops, that's a little bit, maybe turn up just a tiny bit more. Thank you.
There you go.
And this is about 10 minutes. We have time to, yeah? Perfect. Just to say the kind of trajectory of the piano machine in that piece is that maybe in the beginning you hear it's rather elementary and there's not so much, and then it should be this idea that it's learning a bit from the musicians, and then by the end it was taking a little forefront. So once again, thank you so much for coming, and I would be delighted to take any questions you may have.
So that's a lot to enjoy and a lot to absorb, and I'm sure that Patricia will welcome any kind of question. Don't be embarrassed, nothing is too simple, and at Stanford nothing can be too complicated. We have some people going around the room with mics, so if you'd raise your hand, we can get the mic to you, and everybody will be able to hear your question. So there's a man at the back.
Oh, what do I do? Just speak? Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. I'm kind of deeply puzzled here because you go through this very complex process, and then what I see from the movie, you're producing something which I would call like European art music, which could have been could have heard it I'm not that old, but I could have heard it from 1920 to the present day. I've heard this sort of music before. I've been in many of these concerts. And people didn't need to go through this complicated process, to do it. So I'm not quite sure what's going on.
Yes, I mean, I think that's an excellent question, because it's not, I think when we went back to what can computers do, right? So first of all, there's the idea of, can a computer write a piece, right? So okay, we answer that question. Yeah, a computer can write a piece. So then, using these processes, what might be a little bit different, right? So the things that are happening aesthetically are, I would say, a few things. So first of all, the piano is less piano-like, let's say, okay? But of course, there is a verisimilitude that I'm also going for, because I could use piano samples and just have them coming out of speakers, right? If I want something artificial, or I can have a sound, an electronic sound that sounds nothing like an instrument, right? I mean, I could with electronics. Part of our problem is that we have too many possibilities, right? I could use FM synthesis. I could use all this huge palette of colors that you can make with digital sounds. But a lot of the kind of research that's been done at Stanford for a long time has been, first of all, how to, maybe with physical modeling, recreate an instrument. And then you say, well, why recreate an instrument if you already have instruments? Because then you can make these subtle changes and differences that you can't necessarily with a physical instrument. So that's how I feel about the piano machine, that there's something happening there that isn't quite like an acoustic instrument. But as far as a computer writing a score and then performers playing the score, of course that's the same. They're human beings, right? And they play notes. There's notes on a page and they play them. So they don't mind that it's been, composed by me, by a computer, by me using the computer. It still produces notes that they play. But yeah, I think in this piece, what I was happy about is that there's no electronic sound at all in this piece. Zero electronics. But there is this piano machine which is being driven by electronics. So if you say to me, this sounds like acoustic music, I have to say thank you, because that's exactly what it is. It's something that's happening in the acoustic world. Yeah. Thank you.
Other questions from anybody? This is the most.
I see one back here.
Thank you for the talk. I have a lot of questions. Just two things that were interesting. One was the acrylic piece, transparent or glass instrument. Towards the beginning of your talk.
The plates, maybe. No?
It was sort of spirally and.
Yes, the glove. Yes.
Yes. And then the other side.
It looks like this.
Yes. I was just curious to hear more about that and what it was like to work with it.
Yeah, absolutely. This is the reason I have this is I'm co-teaching a class actually in the spring with 2 doctoral students, and one of them, so the Charlie Klavik and Julie Hampton, and one of them, Julie Hampton, has been using this glove as an improviser. So basically, what you saw in the piano machine is that it's these motors that are vibrating and then cause the strings to vibrate. So then the glove is basically a hand-worn version of that. And the reason I came about is that when I was working on the piano machine, just a way of kind of prototyping it was to have these hand-worn motors. I mean, it was a very basic thing, just kind of putting them on these kind of stilts, sort of stick, and then having them on hand and having some flexibility and being able to do that. And that was enjoyable in itself. So, and interesting because it has a different kind of effect, right? So that became an instrument in itself, used first for the harp, but then actually, maybe I can, it's always dangerous to do this, but maybe I can just play a little video if I can find on the computer part. Yeah, hopefully this is not. So you see I'm getting some of those similar sounds as for the piano machine, but it's hand controlled. So I have a piece that uses that as well for the harp. So then you can play these kind of chords, but you can just play way like it. Does that answer your question? Did you have a second part?
I was also curious, as you were one of your acknowledgements, love and sex with robots, you also mentioned work on something with a sex toy.
Yes, yes.
I was wondering about that aspect of your work and how it connects with the other musical aspects.
Yeah, that's a great question. So that was a project that I did for this conference, Love and Sex with Robots. And that's also why Kate Devlin is here with her book Turned On, which is about sex robots. And it was a hackathon with sex toys. And basically, there were people who were there to, we sort of made up teams. And made prototypes for sex toys. And a lot of what we talked about, as I say, was this getting out of the kind of stereotypes and very strict functions of sex toys, very, very heteronormative kind of things sometimes coming from companies. And we actually had company representatives there who were, a lot of them really desired to get out of these boxes, right? So in the end, we made something called a love pad. Actually, my team won. And I won a very expensive vibrator that I now use for musical purposes. So we won with this love pad, which basically, it had forms of excitation that were kind of interesting, but I suppose the novel aspect was creating an experience yourself that you could pre-program. And having an interface that was a rather nice kind of sensuous interface that people could use to kind of guide the experience of someone else remotely. Because a lot of what we saw at this conference actually was how to use devices remotely. So I did the sound design for that, but it was sound design that also had a tactile, haptic aspect to it. Oh, and you said how musically. Well, of course, I mean, all of this is Go was here before Go on with artful design that you see here. A lot of this is how can we think about design problems in an artful manner. And again, this really kind of out of the box of not necessarily thinking of how instruments are usually used or how sex toy in this case is usually used. Yes, another question. Oh, you see all the way in the back. Over here.
So you mentioned that the piano machine is actually learning or has this bank of sounds to try to match to the perfect sound. So what's can you talk a little bit about what's the learning and what does it mean to actually be perfect or get to error of zero? I don't know what that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you. Maybe if we turn down the sound a little bit, I'll just show you a video. Yeah. So this is basically, remember that kind of mix that I had played where it was that similarity matching. So then there are these big ensembles of notes that the piano machine produces to try to recreate those. So this is an example that, I'm sorry, this is a very distorted video. It's just my phone, inside of the piano, so please excuse the sound quality, but at least you get an idea. So just as a reminder of what that's trying to do, that would be like the beginning of this. Yeah, that's what it's trying to imitate. So it's a little bit like that ensemble writing, which is basically this kind of predictive work of saying, I've got these 88 notes. What combination of those notes at what exact amplitudes for the different motors is going to reproduce that sound?
I want to ask you two questions. One is, fascinating to see the slide where you showed the AI history and music.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit more, how long ago, I thought it's just very new, only 3-4 years ago, but it seems like people have been working on AI and music for a long time.
Yeah.
What was the reason, and also the philosophical question, if AI will create music, wouldn't it, take away jobs from musicians and computers would work with it?
I'm really glad you brought up that second part, because that's been a big anxiety. I'll get that after the history. So yeah, if you look, I think the really key point, besides obviously the advent of the computer, which when we're talking about Ada Lovelace's theory, we have to remember that's before even there's this leap of saying electricity is going to be what is running computers, right? So that leap happens later. But I think it's around here, you see, where we really get into these electromechanical means of reproducing sound. Again, being careful about firstism, but the first electroacoustic piece, in a sense, is by having a DAW, so electronically produced piece. And it's really after that you see there's just this big crescendo of activity, right? And that's when, I think first the idea of analysis, understanding how the rules of music could be formulated, then it's just the next step to be producing it. But that's where, and I think that's when I had this, so that's where we get into this problem, right? And this is where I would say about replacement, and it also goes back to the first question. This is where I would say, the means of producing sound, people know this who are working in film, right? That the getting really expressive performance from virtual instruments is not so easy, and that's why I always go back to this question of human expression. Where does that lie? What is that exact aspect? And in some ways, yes, when I do the work with the plates, I'm trying to get some kind of expressivity, certainly the work that I'm doing with the piano, but it's not an idea of replacement. And actually, I should give a shout out to what we're going to be doing for Women in Data Science. The Women in Data Science conference is on 2 March, and the piano machine is coming, and Barbara Nernes, one of our PhD students at Karma, is going to be working with me, doing some, the first solo of the piano machine. So we'll see about this question of replacement. But obviously, actually, I'll tell you a little anecdote about that. At the WITS conference, there's also going to be someone who's just playing, like cocktail music and so on at a certain point. And I think there's no question that the piano machine is trying to recreate that experience, right? I wasn't asked to do that. It's doing its own thing. So I would say that the experience of human performance on an instrument is not at all what we're trying to replace. Those fields are real, and it's had a real impact on areas like the film industry and so on. But this question of expressivity, to me, has not been solved yet. And it's still an area to work on. And that's a positive thing in a way, because there is an individuality of human expression. Yeah, please.
Thank you. This has been fascinating. In your Ada's song, you were on the left-hand side, sitting at a keyboard, a computer keyboard. So, what were you doing? And then the lady singer had this white cable between that computer and her, and then she took her earphone out of her ear. And so, would it be that every time this might be performed, it would be a little different?
Yes, absolutely, yes. So that was, her material was in part being produced in real time. So when she didn't have the real time material, then she put the earbud in, which I have to say is just aesthetically, it's a little bit of a regret of mine that I wanted to use a wireless. But the wireless is made to stay in place, so it was more trouble to take out. So that's why we see this cord, unfortunately. As far as me being on stage, I'm kind of just babysitting things, you know, just because of the amount of rehearsal time and so on. So my presence was necessary to make sure that things went well. But technically that should all be working. So.
And the conductor, you also had a conductor. So,
yes.
So did he know what the piano was going to be doing, the piano machine?
The piano machine has variations, but it also has a temporality that's set. So it's true that, in fact, he was saying that in some rehearsals it was quite different, and at some point he asked me, how different is this going to get? But because it's a responsive system, but I think that's also because I was still fine-tuning it, to be honest, in rehearsals. Because it's a responsive system, it's going to respond to the situation at hand. So it should be too drastically different. And the same thing with what's being generated for soprano. It's responsive, so there's a certain limit of possibilities of what that's going to be.
Patricia, can you tell me a little bit more what she was hearing? Because she was singing words, she was singing pitch, she was singing rhythm. So are you telling me she's getting this in delay and she then produces that?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, because that with audio score, that's not obvious at all, right? So basically, what she has on the score, sometimes she has just pitches to sing. Sometimes what she has is a contour. And words, or, you know, if it's an R, whatever the vowel, whatever it is she is going to sing, okay? And then she receives the pitches that she will then sing, yeah? But before, she receives it maybe about a second or two before, kind of gets that in her head, and then goes ahead and sings, yeah? And actually, first she was controlling that herself, but then we thought it was just a little bit too much for her to do. So actually the pianist is controlling that. So the pianist is, in a sense, almost like when we do in a kind of accompaniment situation, the pianist is, in a sense, giving her the pitches before she has to sing them.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question.
Thank you for this. This was really fascinating. You used the expression interaction several times when you were introducing the work, and a rather kind of conceptual question occurred to me to ask you about that, and that is interaction something you, as a musician and composer, are particularly interested in exploring in this domain, or is interaction something somehow inherent in this very project of AI composition?
Yeah, but that's a fascinating question. I mean, I would say that goes back to the other question about the sense in a way. That what I'm really interested in are feedback loops, which is that's inherent to musicians anyway, right? So we're playing in a musical situation, and we adjust to the musical. But we adjust to the musical situation at hand. That's something we want to do naturally. So then when we make a computer system, we want it to be that responsive. Right? I mean, some people have used the analogy of the computer being another chamber musician, right? Being just as so. We shouldn't, as humans, be the one who have to change, keep in time, do all of these things. For the computer, it's the computer that's also interacting with us, being responsive, and giving us some kind of